It was late evening when Sarah received the letter. The envelope was thick, sealed with an old-fashioned wax stamp, something she hadn't seen in years. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it, not sure why, but the letter felt heavy, almost ominous. She hadn't expected anything today, especially not something so peculiar. As she slid a finger under the seal, carefully opening it, her mind raced. Who could have sent it? There was no return address. The paper inside was yellowed and brittle, like it had been sitting somewhere for years. Sarah unfolded the letter slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The words, scrawled in shaky handwriting, made her stomach drop. Come to the house. Midnight. Don't tell anyone. She stared at the letter, her mind buzzing with questions. What house? Who sent this? And why the secrecy? As the minutes ticked by, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The house it mentioned. She knew it. It was the old mansion at the edge of town, abandoned for decades, a place no one dared to go near. The locals told stories about it, whispering of strange noises and unexplained lights in its windows at night. But Sarah had never believed in those stories, dismissing them as rumors meant to scare children. Yet, here she was, clutching a letter that told her to go there, alone, at midnight. She glanced at the clock. It was already 11:30 p.m. Despite the fear that churned in her stomach, something compelled her to go. It felt urgent, like she had no other choice. Grabbing her coat, she made up her mind. She would go, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what she might find. The night was unusually still as Sarah stepped outside. The air was crisp, and a faint fog clung to the ground, swirling around her ankles as she walked. The town was silent, the only sound the crunch of gravel under her boots. The closer she got to the mansion, the more the unease grew within her. She tried to brush it off, convincing herself it was just nerves. The mansion loomed in the distance, its towering silhouette barely visible through the mist. As she approached the wrought iron gate, Sarah hesitated. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, the sound echoing in the quiet night. Her heart pounded in her ears as she stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the front door. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the letter in her pocket, a reminder of why she was here. With one last deep breath, she reached for the door handle. The door was unlocked, and it swung open with an eerie groan. Sarah hesitated before stepping inside. The mansion was dark, save for a faint glow coming from deeper within the house. She could smell the dust in the air, thick and musty, as though the place hadn't been touched in years. Her footsteps echoed as she ventured further, her heart racing with every creak of the floorboards beneath her. The house seemed to swallow the sound, making her feel isolated, even though she was just a few steps inside. She followed the light, drawn to it as though it were her only guide. As she moved through the grand hallway, her eyes adjusted to the dimness, and she noticed something strange. The house didn't look abandoned. It was furnished, and not just with old, forgotten furniture. It looked lived in, as if someone had been here recently. The faint glow led her to a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and Sarah pushed it open cautiously. Inside was a small, cozy room with a fire burning low in the fireplace. A single armchair sat facing the flames, and the air was warmer here, almost comforting. But something was off. There was no one in the chair. The room was eerily still, save for the crackling of the fire. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of life. A shiver ran down her spine as she noticed something on the mantel above the fireplace. It was a photograph, framed in silver, and it stopped her in her tracks. The photograph was of her, a picture she had never seen before, taken in front of this very house. She felt a cold dread settle in the pit of her stomach. Someone had been expecting her. As Sarah stared at the photograph, a soft sound broke the silence, the quiet creak of a floorboard behind her. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. But there was no one there. The door was still slightly open, the hallway beyond dark and empty. Her pulse raced as she tried to steady her breathing. It had to be her imagination, she told herself, the house settling or the wind. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she backed out of the room, her mind screaming at her to leave. Yet something kept her there, a sense of unfinished business. Clutching the letter in her pocket, she knew she couldn't turn back now. Whoever had sent it was here, somewhere, and she needed answers. With trembling hands, Sarah continued to explore the house, swinging her steps cautious as she ventured deeper into the darkened corridors. Each room she passed was untouched by time, yet filled with a strange, unsettling energy. She couldn't understand why, but the house seemed to know she was there, watching her every move. As she rounded a corner, a sudden gust of wind blew through the hallway, extinguishing the dim glow from a nearby candle. She froze, her breath caught in her chest. Then, faintly, she heard it, the sound of whispering. It was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. The whispers seemed to come from the walls themselves, surrounding her in a cacophony of voices. Fear gripped her, but she pressed on, determined to find the source. She followed the sound, her heart racing, until she reached a door at the end of the hallway, a door she hadn't noticed before. The door was old, its paint peeling, and it gave off a sense of foreboding. Sarah hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. The whispers had stopped the moment she arrived, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. She could feel her pulse in her throat as she reached for the doorknob, her fingers cold and trembling. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. A cold draft wafted up from below, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like blood. She recoiled, instinctively wanting to turn back, but something compelled her to move forward. The letter had told her to come, and despite her fear, she felt she had to know why. Slowly, cautiously, she descended the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest with each step. The staircase creaked under her weight as Sarah descended into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the darkness seemed to press in around her, thick and suffocating. At the bottom of the stairs, she reached a small room, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center of the room was a table, and on it, something was covered with a cloth. She approached slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she reached out to lift the cloth. Underneath was an old leather-bound book, its cover cracked and worn with age. Beside it lay a key, tarnished and heavy. She picked up the key, her fingers trembling as she held it up to the light. It was engraved with strange symbols she didn't recognize, and as she stared at it, the whispering began again. Louder this time, more urgent. It filled her head, making it impossible to think. Sarah backed away from the table, clutching the key in her hand, her heart racing. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and she could feel them pressing against her mind, trying to force their way in. She stumbled toward the stairs, desperate to escape the suffocating darkness of the basement. As she climbed, the whispers followed her, echoing in her ears, pulling her back. She reached the top of the stairs and slammed the door behind her, gasping for breath. But the house wasn't finished with her yet. As she turned to leave, the hallway stretched out before her, impossibly long, the exit seeming to recede further into the distance. Panic welled up inside her as the walls began to close in, the air growing thick and heavy. She clutched the key tighter, knowing it was somehow the answer to everything. But what did it unlock? Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The house fell into an eerie silence, and the hallway returned to normal. Sarah stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. Then she remembered the key. She pulled it from her pocket, examining the strange symbols once more. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what it could unlock. That's when she remembered the door, the one she hadn't noticed before. It had been at the end of the hallway, hidden in plain sight. Without wasting any more time, she hurried back down the corridor, her eyes scanning the walls for the door. There it was, just as she had left it. Her heart pounded as she slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in a soft golden light. Inside, standing in the center of the room, was a figure she recognized all too well. It was Michael, her long-lost brother, the one who had disappeared years ago without a trace. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, as though he had been trapped in this house for far too long. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've been waiting for you." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she stepped toward him, her mind racing with questions. "What happened to you? Where have you been?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and relief. "This house, it took me," he said. "I've been trapped here, waiting for someone to free me." Sarah's heart ached as she realized the truth. The house had called her here, drawn her in with its whispers and shadows, all so she could save him. But as she reached out to him, the house shuddered, its walls groaning. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and Sarah knew they had to leave.